Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I am with you here on No Soundbites Allowed. We're going to be starting in just a moment, and I thank everyone for being able to listen in. And we're going to try and have an interesting program today. I'm not quite sure how we're going to achieve that. It's just a difficult day. But I think that's enough time. Let's actually jump on in. Hello, everyone. There we go. Michael Voss here with you at No Soundbites Allowed. And I thank everyone. If you may notice, thank goodness, we've gotten to phase 2 here in New York State, and I was able to get a haircut. And it's about time. And so I look a little bit better off than I usually do, and got rid of the beard and the haircut. And a lot of people have been doing the same thing. By the way, I want to give a shout out to my barber, Blaze, over at Blazing Cuts over on Oak Street here in Binghamton, New York. Did a fantastic job. Thank you. You know, I look good. And I needed it. So with that said, let me start off. There's just so much going on right now in our nation. So many issues, so many questions. And we've had a slippery slope. We've been sliding from one issue to another to another. We're here now in June, and it's just a mess. And already I have some comments. Frank Polisamo says, lawnmowers don't count. I have no idea what that means. Vic Furman, yo, Mike, in Sydney, passing out flyers with the truckster. Cool. And Frank Polisamo goes, you look like you lost all the hair. Yeah, I did. That I did. So in 2020 so far, we have gone from fears that have been promoted by the news media about COVID-19. We were told we were all going to die. We were told the Black Plague is coming upon us. We were told that 2 million people would die and that we had no choice. But the only thing we could do is flatten the curve to be able to survive this, to limit the amount of pressure that would be on hospitals throughout the nation in trying to address millions of people dying. And we have found out that that was completely wrong in every aspect, because flattening the curve doesn't mean there are less people who are affected. It doesn't mean there are less people who die. It means that we're stretching out that number over a longer period of time. And we see, even I believe it was today by Governor Cuomo, the peak of the COVID crisis was in late March, early April. We're way past that. The peak came and went, and while many people have been affected, and we are sorry to hear that, our nation has continued to move forward. But as we have moved forward, we have seen that as people have realized that we're not all going to die, as we have realized that our nation needs to reopen, as we have learned that we need to get back to our normalcy of our lives, now comes racial violence and racial tensions. The timing is just very odd, and it's upsetting, very upsetting. Maybe not everyone agrees with it. And not everyone's going to agree with my take on it, and that's fine. You don't have to. Because in having conversations, our First Amendment is not about you are only allowed to say what someone else agrees with. It's that you can speak about whatever it is you want to talk about. That it's your voice that you get to put out there. That's the first thing and most important thing about the First Amendment. It's not what is approved, it's what you think. But we've had a lot of people take away from that. And as such, I've personally been attacked recently because I don't agree with certain political organizations, in particular, Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, Antifa, and others. And I've been told, Mike, you shouldn't talk about that. You shouldn't discuss it because it's such a hot button. It's such an issue. But you know what's an issue that is around our entire nation? Everyone is talking about this. This is an important issue. I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about here. So, oops, wrong spot. If you're looking at the Wall Street Journal, June 7th, today, Americans are more troubled by police actions and killing of George Floyd than by violence at protests, polls find. Let's stop and think about that for a second. First and foremost, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There is a difference between protests, rioting, and looting. They are not the same thing. The rioting and looting that has been going on across our nation is not a protest. It has nothing to do with George Floyd. I think most people in America acknowledge that, recognize it, and can separate it. There is a big difference. And yes, people should be able to protest, and I commend people when they do protest. Because whether you think butter pecan is better than vanilla, and if you want to have a protest about it, and if you can get people to join you in that, knock yourself out. If you want to protest anything, do so. The moment that violence is introduced, any form of violence is introduced, it is no longer a protest. It is no longer an expression of your First Amendment. It is then a criminal act. It is violence against others. And we need to separate those two things. And violence against others, whether it's rioting, looting, suppression of voices, is not covered by the First Amendment. That is a crime. And we need to be honest with each other to say that. And we need to acknowledge that there are individuals who will use protests for their advantage to gain a political agenda, to move forward a political agenda. And that's what we're seeing across America. And part of that we see here with the Wall Street Journal, because they're conflating protests along with violence that's been going on, because they're not the same thing. Violence at a protest no longer makes it a protest. It's now rioting and looting. They're not the same thing. So we need to be honest about that. And in the Wall Street Journal article, they're conflating the actions of police with violence at protests. They're not the same thing. I don't think anyone in America is not troubled by police abuse, which is a small portion of what we see police do every day. And our police are essential in our nation. But when we start conflating these things, when we start mixing these emotions, we get results that are never positive for anyone. That's my experience. But let's get back to this. So what does the Wall Street Journal say? Well, they say that 2-1, and this is just the article I'm having here for you to see, but 2-1 margin, more people are troubled by the actions of police in the killing of George Floyd than violence at some protests. Everyone in America is upset about the violence against George Floyd. I have yet to hear anyone who says that they weren't upset by that, that they don't think that was wrong, that they don't think that that was an abuse of power. No one in America, as far as I don't know who they're talking to, that isn't upset about George Floyd dying. But they go on to say that the majority, 80% of the nation, feels that the country is spiraling out of control. Well, yeah, it is. It is pretty apparent that the nation is out of control at the moment. We have protests and violence that have been going on throughout this nation for over a week. We've seen it in Minneapolis, LA, New York, Utah. Yeah, violence is all over the nation. Dallas. Yeah, that's out of control. We're seeing it not end. We're seeing it continue. Violence and destruction and vandalism day after day after day. And something is very abnormal about that. When you look at it, when you look at most protests, when you look at actually most riots, they usually last 3 to 5 days. And that's just because it takes a lot of energy, a lot of anger to continue to go out and have a riot, to have violence, to have looting, widespread looting. And it's very hard to maintain that emotion. So when we see that it's continuing beyond 3 to 5 days, you have to ask the question, why? What's promoting it? What's moving it forward? When we're seeing people, I don't think anyone in the nation agrees that we have seen scene after scene after scene of an individual who has been beaten into submission, laying on the ground and being attacked by individuals, being kicked in the face, being stepped on, being murdered. I don't think anyone is agreeable with that. That would keep people away from these events, you would think. You would think that people wouldn't continue to encourage this. So something is going on. Something is not quite right. Something doesn't make sense here. When we watch the former police commissioner who was killed protecting a store, shot by looters, you would think people would not want to continue looting, that this would be a reason to stop. When we have watched police officers and individuals being beaten down by protesters, that they would say, well, I don't want to be part of that. Let's not do that anymore. And yet it's continuing in this nation. What is motivating that? The change in the direction for 2020. The change is about the violence. It's about racial tensions and keeping those racial tensions high. Now, is that to keep our cities and our states under martial law, or otherwise known as the emergency powers that we've seen, like in New York State, where Governor Cuomo is the supreme dictator of New York State, effectively, having changed over 260 different laws just by himself, and similar reactions and actions by Governor Newsom in California, Governor Whitmer, and many others? I don't know. Or is that just a natural byproduct? I don't know. But what we do know is racial tensions in this nation are once again at a peak. And what's going to happen? You know, it wasn't very long ago that we saw, matter of fact, it was just June 3rd, 49% of the nation being polled by Rasmussen Reports said that Antifa is a terrorist organization. That's an important number. 49%, half the nation essentially, believe that it is criminals that have been taking advantage of the situation, these riots and the looting. That this is something that is coming out of people taking advantage of the natural and normal protest against what happened to George Floyd. And yet it isn't being stopped. This is being promoted. We're seeing this spread. You know, again, according to Rasmussen Reports, just back on May 27th, the nation was upset with Joe Biden because he was using race to promote his politics. And in this, we see that 69% of Americans polled believe that politicians only raise racial issues so that they can be elected. Let me think about that. May 27th, 2 days after George Floyd died, before most of the nation was paying attention to George Floyd or anything about him, Joe Biden was on the Breakfast Club and directly stated that if you have to be black because, or rather to be black, you have to vote Democrat and you have to vote for Joe Biden. And he took advantage and disrespected black voters, discounted them completely and wholesale. And everyone in the nation reacted and said, that's racist. How can you say that? That is terrible. And then almost immediately after that happened, suddenly the nation paid attention to the fact that George Floyd had died and how he died. And then the tensions went up again. Was that because of Joe Biden and the media looking for an outlet, or was it a natural reaction? I can't tell you. But I can tell you that we saw it happen. And now the nation is completely fixated on racial tensions. The very thing that most people, 69% of the public, say is only done because of race issues. We only hear about the racial issues in our nation when it comes time for an election and when we hear someone talking about race issues, and almost always that's a Democrat. Does that mean these race issues don't exist when there is an election going on? Is it not existing until a Democrat brings it up? And why is it that everyone is completely sure that no matter whether this is brought up or not, when this is brought up, nothing is going to be done? That they're not going to fix it? That the politicians talking about this, the people who are promoting violence, the people who are protesting, not protesting, but the politicians, the entertainers, they're not getting anything done. They don't care if things get done. In fact, we know that they don't give they don't care. Almost said the wrong thing there. We know they don't care because, as an example, Representative Elliot Engel on live mic doesn't care about looting and riots. He cares about getting reelected. According to the New York Post, on June 2nd, in the middle of the riots that were happening in New York State, that are happening in New York City as we speak, what did we hear? That Elliot Engel, Representative Elliot Engel, was concerned about speaking to his audience. If he didn't have a primary, he wouldn't care. When asked to repeat that question in the Bronx, which was suffering from riots and protests, he was asked again, "What did you say?" by the Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr. And he was asked again, what was that? He said, "If I didn't have a primary, I wouldn't care." To which Diaz says, "Don't do that to me." He didn't want to have to address the question of politics because he wouldn't let Representative Elliot Engel use race to help his election. That's not me saying that. That's the New York Post reporting what was overheard by Representative Elliot Engel, who didn't care. He doesn't care. That scares me. That should scare everyone. Is that what America has come to? That we have to huddle in fear. That we have to huddle in fear of something that is 98% survivable. We have been told by the media that we're going to all die, essentially. And when we don't die, after giving away all of our rights, our freedoms, our power, and giving it to usurpers like Governor Cuomo, once we realize that this is wrong and we try and get our power back, we try to get our lives back, we're now told by politicians, you have to be worried about race. And race is the most important thing because they don't care. They just want to get reelected, like Representative Elliot Engel. And that's not the only way that we see people being used in this way, how race is being used in this way. Did you know, again, going back to Rasmussen reports, national polling, 27% of blacks say that black voters who choose President Trump over Biden aren't black. See, this is an extension of that same theme. Race matters. It's all about race. We stopped talking about COVID. No one's talking about the protests, the thousands of people, even in Binghamton, New York. 1,000 people came together. No one was worried about COVID-19. No one cared. Yes, many of them wore masks. Many do not. Going across the entire nation, look at the rioting and the looting. Most of these people don't have masks. No one's worried about COVID-19. They're worried about whether or not these people can riot. We're hearing Mayor de Blasio being proud of his daughter and looters destroying his city. We're seeing Governor Cuomo saying he's standing by the protesters, but doing nothing about the riots and looting happening in his state. And we hear people saying, well, you know, the only way you can truly be black is to vote Democrat. You know, that upsets me. That upsets me. Because we're using totally separate issues and trying to make it so political and so divisive. How dare anyone, how can you say that? I'm wondering what's going on with those 27% of people. I have to wonder about people who say, you aren't black unless you do X. Isn't that exactly what Biden said? You aren't black unless you vote for Biden. Why? Why does the color of the skin I was born with define all the decisions of my life? From politics to anything else. How dare you? Would you say that to someone who's Chinese? Would you say that to someone who is Hispanic? Would you say that to or Asian or white? No, because it would be considered racist, the ultimate of racism, and you would be then shut down. In this current culture, you be canceled. And you should be, because that's nothing but racism. How dare we think that? And yet we have people who are using that. You know, I personally have had to deal with this. I had a gentleman recently, and I posted this on Twitter. All skin folk ain't your kinfolk. In other words, not everyone is black enough to be black. It's a racist comment. It's a racist statement. And I can't understand that. I'm not going to let it stand. I did respond, and I've made a statement. How dare someone use race, the color of my skin, to try and define whether and this is because I'm running as a candidate, but to define anything about me. How dare you say that because of my skin color, people shouldn't associate with me or support me or be involved? How dare you? That is an insanely racist statement. Insanely statement. But yet there are people who believe in that, who say, well, you're doing something that isn't approved, so it's okay. How can we do that? How as a society can we accept that? How is that not troubling and terrifying to people? That someone would say, you're not black enough for me. Well, first of all, you shouldn't be defining candidates by whether or not they have a certain skin color. Let's start there. That's insane and that's racist and that's horrible. That has nothing to do with human beings. That has nothing to do with the quality of the person that's running for whatever race or anything else they're doing. I thought we understood that. This is 2020. No one is defined by their race, their gender, their skin color, their sexual preference. You're human beings. You're Americans. You're defined by what you do. And yet someone is saying, no. You're still defined by your skin color. And you have to do what's approved. Otherwise, we're going to attack you, as they have tried to attack me. I reject that. In fact, I asked my opponent, just to let people know, I'm a candidate. I'm running for the Broome County legislator's race. My opponent is Bob Wessler. Bob happens to be a white man. I'm black. I'm black Puerto Rican, to be exact, black Hispanic. Now, I would never tell anyone, don't vote for Bob because he's white. That's horrible. I disagree with that. And if anyone were to mention it, I will denounce it. At the same time, I would love to hear from Bob Wessler and everyone else say, no one should ever say, don't vote for Mike because he's not black enough. That should be denounced roundly and uniformly. It isn't. I've called for my opponent to say that. I've come out and said it myself. No one should use race, sex, gender, sexual identity to define politics and how we can help a community. That isn't the answer that we're hearing back. And that terrifies me. It terrifies me that people are trying to intimidate and use others and use the death of George Floyd to advance politics and to advance racism. That's horrible. We should call that out, and I'm going to do that now. Whether no one watches this at all or if everyone watches it, it doesn't change the fact that I will call that out. That is wrong. That is beneath America and everyone in America. Where are we going? Let me ask you, where are we going? Right now, today, June 7th, there is the progressive leaders of tomorrow, the same people who attacked me on the basis of race, saying that I'm not black enough. I don't know how they get that determination, because when I look in the mirror, I'm black enough for me. I'm black enough for everyone. But somehow they're saying I'm not. These very same people are now going, and they have morphed the protest of George Floyd from being about George Floyd's death to now being about their political agenda. And you may say, Mike, how do you get that? Where does that come from? Well, let's actually go to their website. Let's actually see what they're saying. And what they say, where is it? Come on, Here we go. Progressive leaders of tomorrow. What are they about? They want to talk about the abuses of the criminal justice system, the housing crisis. What does that have to do with George Floyd and the way he died? They want to talk about healthcare inequality. Not actually equality, but inequity. I will deal with equity in a second. But what's that got to do with George Floyd? They want to talk about the opioid crisis. What does that have to do with George Floyd? They want to talk about the school to prison pipeline that they say exists. What does that have to do with George Floyd? Nothing. This is no longer about George Floyd. This has nothing to do with George Floyd. This has to do with a political agenda that they want to advance using emotion to take advantage of people, quite honestly. Because those aren't issues about George Floyd. Now you're going to say, well, it's about black people because black people are disadvantaged. That is a lie. That is a lie. In America in 2020, while there is racism, no doubt, but that is not to say that black people are inherently deficient and not able to take care of themselves. We have a black middle class. We have a black upper class. We have people who do very well. We do not have the environment of the 1960s, the 1950s, the 1940s. You are able to get educated today better than ever before. You have more access to information than ever before. We have more laws and more people looking out to make sure that people are treated equally and fairly throughout this nation in every aspect of our lives more than ever before. In 5 decades of my life, we have advanced this to a degree that in the 70s we never thought would exist to this day. And it is here. And yet we have individuals who are using this message to try and advance their political agenda. It's not about George Floyd. Somewhere in the last 5 protests, the message changed. And we've seen that across the nation. People are using racism to advance their political agenda. This is about politics. It's not about George Floyd. It's not about the violence. Because if we really want to help, one of the first things that we want to do, stop the black on black crime. Over 6,000, 7,000 people every year, black on black crime. 6,000 to 7,000 blacks are killed by blacks every year. Let's start there. You want to really work on the issue, you want to make the community better because of race, start there. And if you can lower that number, I am pretty sure everything else goes down as well. Well, we're going to get a comment. Someone has a message. Hello. Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Michael Voss. Who is it I'm speaking with?
This is Jason from Binghamton.
Hey, Jason. Yes. Folks, this is Jason from Binghamton, not Jason Garnar, the county executive, who hasn't been on the show in a while. He used to, but he hasn't been in a little while. Jason, go ahead. What's on your mind?
Yeah, well, you just kind of walked into the conversation where I pretty much began last week. And, you said 5 protests ago, it was no longer about Floyd, but yeah. I pretty much said that this was never about Floyd to begin with. I mean, the ignition and the fire that, drew this into the protest was always an alternative political agenda. And when you look at all those little, that list there that you had up there with, what plot stands for and what they're trying to accomplish, when it comes to their overall gripe and problem, the problem is, in their mind, it's capitalism, and it's the founding of the country, and it's the Constitution. And they're going to, put it back on, everything to do with the founding. And the thing is that no matter what demands are made by them, and no matter who sits down and says, hey, you know what, I hear you, let's have a conversation, the thing is that they'll never be happy until they dismantle the system itself. And the system is our democracy, our Constitution, and our capitalist system. Until they can take it down and implement their own communist social order, they will not be satisfied. And so, one of the hardest things that I see is that I see conservatives and those individuals on the right constantly, bringing a conversation to talk about the police or to talk about race. And yet, the bottom line, though, is that we really have to define these protesters and these radical individuals who are doing the protesting as what their actual gripe and what their actual problem is, and stop actually, going down and talking about race and talking about, the police, because quite frankly, those matters will never be satisfied. There always will be an issue. There will always be a racist individual. There always will be a bad cop. And as long as those problems are there, they will continue to simply point to the system which created that. And that is our Constitution. And that is the United States, which they believe is founded on white principle. Because the color of their skin and, throughout the sins of the United States, the only way to get true justice, again, is to dismantle, the country the way it was founded.
Well, you brought up something that's very interesting, and I do want to address. Because, and I have it on the board, Rasmussen reports from April 11th of 2019, 10% of the population thought that most cops are racist. This was during the Jussie Smollett hoax, where race was used to promote the idea that the police were ignoring a racially motivated attack that didn't exist, that didn't happen. And it was using race to promote politics. That was all it was. Jussie Smollett. That's why he's still under federal charges. And most people agreed, yes, there's a problem with police, but they aren't racist. Today, we're looking at it, and most people are out there saying, well, the police must be racist, and we have 16% of the nation saying you have to defund the police departments altogether. We have celebrities who are paying for and funding looting and rioting, as well as calling for the police to be defunded across the nation, which I think is absolutely stupid. And you have only to think about the next time someone robs your house, threatens your life, breaks a law, who's going to come and help you if there is no police? But let me ask you, how do you feel about that? Because I understand there is a legitimate question here about the interaction of police and various races, and also the way people reflect and react back. But what do you think? I said a lot, well, I know.
Well, I was going to say, about some of the gripes that they have with law enforcement. I mean, ultimately, they're going to the lowest denominator is pretty much, hey, let's just, completely eliminate, the police. And, and it's just like, okay, so where's the conversation even start when you've already started at something, so absurd as that? And, that's, I think, part of the idea is that instead of them defining the problem and also defining, a legitimate solution, it forces individuals who actually have, heart and the mind to actually start just digging in and just start pushing forward, that irregardless of whether they work or not, it's just a virtue signal to say that, hey, we're doing something. And that is like the worst thing you possibly do, because many policies that are, that are pushed out like that end up being like the worst policies you can possibly have, especially when it comes to, trying to implement changes within law enforcement, because it only makes it more difficult for good people or good cops to actually do the job that they're given. And it actually makes it less enticing for new people to want to actually get into law enforcement, So my point is this, is that, I think that people really have to define individuals by their overall gripe and their problem. And that is, like I said, they have a problem with capitalism. They have a problem with their country, and that's what they want to destroy. And, we'll keep the conversation there. And then, once they're, if they're, and we'll debate that on that level. When it comes to police policy and individuals, the problem is that too, they define, police as a group, and they don't actually point out bad individuals, And so if one person does something bad, the entire group is bad. And yet it is very ironic, and the Democrats definitely get away with this majorly, because I looked at the protests that they had, the little parades that they had in the last two weeks, and the last one that they did, what was it, on Monday or whatever, that when they, or was it Tuesday? I don't even remember. It was
They've had five. Anyway. You're talking about locally. There's been five.
Yes.
This is about the fifth one today.
yeah, whichever one that they came down. Well, when they came down to the police department and then started, chanting out in front of there. Well,
That
the
was
thing
on
is that
Tuesday.
was it Tuesday? Yeah. So the thing is that what I was going to say is that people are defining this as being a peaceful protest, right? And they're saying, okay, yeah, they were peaceful. And the thing is, though, is all the rhetoric and all the intent behind what they were saying was not peaceful at all. And yet here they are, they're saying things like "F the police," right? And that's supposed to what? Open a dialogue to actually get some valid change. And what would happen though is that irregardless of them saying that, and no matter how, disgusting and horrible, what their intent is, you will have individuals within the Democrat Party saying, well, they're they were peaceful, they were just bringing part
That's not
issues,
peace.
felt with their heart. And yet, the irony is that if you had a Second Amendment rally and you had one individual from the KKK end up showing up, irregardless of whether he was ousted the moment he gets there, that entire rally is now considered a white supremacist rally. And yet, like I said, in contrast, you have these individuals within these parades, uttering, such vulgarity and then menacing and getting in the face of the police and saying things, to try to provoke a violent incident. Nobody actually pushes back, against that.
Well, there's a lot of issues. And see, folks, I understand. There's a lot of issues here. There's a lot of emotions here from many different directions. One of the things I want to emphasize is where are we going in 2020? We're seeing, just as you mentioned, we've seen protests where even armed citizens, which, gun control, armed citizens, how dare you get together? How dare you protest someone's act telling you can't have a firearm? And yet that was violent just because it existed. Yet this is okay, even though we're seeing riots come out of it. We're seeing looting come out of it. Even here in Binghamton, we saw a playground for children was burned down. But yet that's not supposed to be connected. Yet we can't blame or connect them. It's part of the same message of anger and violence, I think. But let me also address, there's a bunch of people who are talking. Jay Fletcher mentions, if Plot really thinks Black Lives Matter, why isn't Plot acknowledging the deaths of those Black lives lost by persons in the Black neighborhoods that attempted to stop the violence and destruction? Which I think he's talking about. Look at Minneapolis. The riots, the looting, the burning of buildings have destroyed that community and have destroyed those people's lives in that community, destroyed their lives and their livelihood going forward, just like happened after Rodney King in L.A. Communities were devastated for years as no business would come in and they had burnt down buildings everywhere and the blight. He goes on to mention, Jay Fletcher mentions, attempting to stop the violence and destruction to private property and businesses, which is what I'm speaking of. They won't address that because that's not important to them. It's not what it's about at the end of the day, I believe. Teresa Marie mentions, if they want the police gone, they will open up a mess of self-armed private people, wild, wild west. That is possibly one of the outcomes, and that is also a problem. And then Jay Fletcher goes on to mention, Anthony Logan had an excellent podcast discussing this. No mention by the mainstream media about this. I did not see his podcast on that, so I can't speak to it. And I can't say that this has been the best. I really don't like talking about race. And I know you're still there, Jason, but I don't like talking about race in politics. I don't like talking about race in our lives because I think that fuels racism. It fuels division. The more we talk about it, the more we divide people. I think when you just deal with people day to day and just treat them like people with respect, you advance more and you do more to help everyone be equal. Not equity, but equal. And you can address all kinds of issues when you're just dealing with people as people. But the moment you start trying to say, well, the problem with housing is based on someone's skin color. You say that the problem with healthcare is based on someone's skin color. You say that the opioid crisis is based on someone's skin color. And now you're separating people because I think almost all of us can agree they're not connected. That's not true. These are issues that affect everyone. I mean, am I reading that wrong? What do you think, Jason?
Well, they're trying to divide people by using a Marxist, theory of intersectionality. Race just happens to be, one of those things on the, entire spectrum. And so they categorize people by different strengths, and generally they focus on either, gender, a female, transvestites, and then homosexuals, and all those individuals are all put in a hierarchy of a list. And so they define people upon their defined victimhood, I suppose, on a scale. And so they constantly are talking about that. And then what they do, they try to disarm you. If you happen to be, like, for example, if you're a white male, you're on the top of the pole. And so what that means is that you can't criticize anything down on the bottom, because in your opinion, doesn't matter, because you are the victimizer and they are the victim. And the thing is, this works though, because I've even seen, I look around in my Facebook, feeds, and one of the things, I see is a lot of, white individuals are going to the point, asking the question, what can I do to be a better white person? And what have I done wrong? And it's what it's called this white guilt,
I know.
And and this is part of the way that the Marxists and the communism work their ways into society. They make you doubt, your genuine, self, whether how good of a heart and how good of a person you are doesn't matter, because the thing is that just by you being an extension on the top of the pole, and you are, victimizing the rest of the people. So, that's the view that I see when it comes to this entire racism. It's not, and like I said, we can focus on the racism that does farther divide it, but it is, like I said, this is Marxism, this is communism, this is the direction what they're trying to focus on. And like I said, the conversation, if you focus on what their intent is, what their desire and their overall goals, rather than police and black policy and all this other stuff, you definitely get more, you get farther headway. With counter arguing these individuals.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it's just limited to that, and I'm going to explain in a second. But also, I want to open up the line because, folks, yes, you can call in at 607-242-1582. You can always call in, you can text, and also, obviously, we have many people who are sending in messages, and I thank you all for that, because I love the messages. Let me let you go for a moment, Jason, and I want to make sure I'm addressing everybody else as well. But
Sure.
I thank you, as always, I thank you for being a fan of the show, and I thank you for calling in. And I hope others will take your lead and call in as well, especially if they think I'm wrong. If they think there's another viewpoint, I would love to hear it, especially from members of Plot. All right?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jason.
Bye.
One of the things Jason mentioned, and I want to bring up, this isn't just about having people who are white apologize for being white, which I disagree with. No one should apologize for the skin that they were born. That's just ridiculous. Because if you have to apologize for being white or black or anything else, then what's the point? You're constantly apologizing because someone else is going to have a disagreement. You're somehow dehumanizing people because they have to apologize for being born. I disagree with that. No one should apologize for being born. Equally, everyone should be treated the same. Everyone should be treated with respect for being them. And no one should be put upon because of that. And that's why I see this really got me very angry. And I know the person who sent this text out. And while we have different political points of view, I didn't think it was a personal issue, but now it suddenly is a personal issue. And somehow I am no longer black or Hispanic because even though I have the skin of a black person, I'm somehow not black because I don't agree with his political point of view. I'm sorry, that's racist. That's a racist statement. How dare you say that? And we see that being applied both white, black, everyone. If you're not of the mindset that someone wants you to be, you must be evil, you must be terrible, you must be something else. It's horrible. How dare you say that? And I think that destroys us. You add that to the devastation that's happening because of COVID-19, and how do we move forward from this? I mean, that's a real question. That's a real question that I have, at the very least. I think many people do. How are we going to improve our nation? Right now, we have to worry about COVID-19 in October. And we have our elected leaders failing to tell us that they have a plan. I'm not even asking them for the best plan or a perfect plan. They don't even have a plan. We have our economy is faltering and we're trying to rebuild it. And we have people like Governor Cuomo that are holding us back in being able to restart our economy, our lives. And yet, we're adding to that problem, which is a significant problem that affects every single community and everybody in the nation. And if we can't prosper individually, we don't prosper as a nation. And yet we have people adding on to that problem and saying, well, not only can we not move forward, but let's divide even further based on race and whether or not you're doing something that's approved. I have a problem with that. Maybe I lose my election. Maybe people hate me. Maybe I'm probably going to be labeled a racist. I'm sure someone's going to come out and say, well, Michael Vasquez is a racist because they don't agree with me, which is stupid. You can say you don't agree with me. You can tell me that you don't believe in my politics. You can tell me that the issues I'm advancing and the solutions I'm suggesting don't work. That's fine. But when you say, well, that's all because he's the wrong skin color, or he doesn't acknowledge his skin color, well, that's stupid. If anything, you're going to say, I don't acknowledge my skin color. I don't talk about race because I don't think it's important. I'm a human being. I'm an American first. But obviously not everyone agrees with that. Obviously, and that really disturbs me. That really angers me. It's why, this discussion today is started so erratically, because it's really not an issue I want to talk about. I don't think it's an issue that helps America. Yes, we can improve America by being aware of issues that continue to move forward, that some people continue, a very small portion of people continue to have racist ideas. And there are problems, there are some problems in our system, absolutely. We've fixed a lot of them. We have improved a lot of them. Some still exist. But we can fix that. And we fix that by addressing the issues without dividing people and saying, if you don't agree with my answer, you're evil. That doesn't fix anything. That makes more of a problem. You're telling me that people are evil inherently because of their skin color. When you say that white people have to apologize for being born, you're telling me that white people are inherently evil. That's stupid. I'm listening to people like this gentleman, as I've shown it before and I'll show it again. He's saying that people can't, what he wants is, he's blaming old white politicians for destroying America. And that people should not vote for a black man because he wants to see blacks and women in office. And people shouldn't vote for that black or that woman or that person of color, because they don't agree with him. And therefore you should elect or re-elect the old white person in politics that he blamed in the first place for the problem. It makes no sense. It's illogical. And that's the problem at the core of this. It's illogical. You can't tell me that you want to defeat racism by creating more racism. And that doesn't help our country advance. When we have so many problems to focus on, we don't move forward if we keep holding on to these ideas that divide us and destroy our nation. It's not a positive. Or that when we take advantage of serious issues and emotionally critical issues like George Floyd dying, and we use that to try and advance a political agenda that has nothing to do with it. I don't care who you are. The death of George Floyd has nothing to do with the opioid crisis in America. They're not connected. They're not the same thing. One doesn't have to deal with the other. They're not. That's just a fact. But if you're using the emotional reaction and anger to the death of George Floyd that should never have happened, and you're using that to advance a political agenda, I tell you, something's wrong. And I don't think it's not wrong for me to say that. It's wrong for it being happening. We got a couple of comments. Hang on. Tina mentions, I cannot understand what it is like to be a black person You don't have to. That's okay. And I am sure there are cases of racism. There are. And they exist for Asians, Hispanics, women. There's all kinds of things. And it is not right that some black people are targeted for a number of reasons, but I find it hard to believe it is under every rock and around every corner. I agree with that. It isn't. We can never move forward if everything that happens is because of color. We need prison reform. Yes. Not setting all prisoners free, especially because of COVID or race. That's just silly. We need to have law enforcement reform. Obviously, we all agree on that. Not take away all police, which is just anarchy. Definitely look at some of their protocols, records of policemen, and weed out the bad eggs, which we should do. But when I see people kneeling in apology for being white, it makes me angry and sick to my stomach. It upsets me as well. Because there is no difference for me, Tina, when I look at that, I look at, and who's the next person who has to kneel and apologize for existing? Because if a group can tell you, you need to apologize for existing to one group, why can't they say it to another and every other group? Who is absolved from that? Oh, blacks are absolved. Well, today they are, but what about tomorrow? Gays may be absolved today, but what about tomorrow? What's the next group they go after once they get this group in line? It's upsetting. That's not what America is about. That's just a different form of racism and sexism. It's another ism, and they're justifying it because, well, we're black. We're First of all, I don't believe in being marginalized. They like to say, well, it's because you're marginalized. No, I'm not marginalized. I am the equal of anyone and everyone else I have met in my life because of the actions I have taken in my life. Don't label me as marginalized. That's insulting. That's just wrong. And from that basis, they try and say, well, we have to protect others and we have to take away from people. You're wrong. The process is wrong. It's one thing to say there's an issue and say, let's fix it. It's another thing to say, well, people are inherently evil, and so we have to punish them. That's wrong. That's just racist. That's fascist. Jason from Binghamton has mentioned their definition of racism is not the same as mine. No, it is not. It is absolutely not. Theirs is based on politics. Mine is based on people choosing to treat people differently based on their race. That you treat people differently and negatively because of their race, their religion. It is just obvious. But they're basing it on politics. If you don't agree with my politics, you are inherently evil. They say Plot would say this, and they have, and that I disagree with. I mean, I've seen in person Messiah of Plot, Binghamton Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow. I've watched him in a meeting go out before he recognized who I was. I was allowed into the meeting, and I listened to him talk about how it's okay to destroy the property of landlords because somehow that's connected to slavery. And paying a landlord is basically being a slave to a slave owner. That's stupid, but he believes that. And he tells other people that. And he tries to encourage them to believe that so that they can destroy the property of the landlords. That doesn't help anyone. That doesn't make the system better. These are the stupid things that we hear, and yet this is the inherent thing. He wants to destroy the system, Messiah. From my observation of his words in person, he wants to destroy the system, and he's using emotion and racism to forward that agenda. That is wrong, and we need to call that out. Racism is not the answer to 2020. That's not going to get us a better person elected. That's not going to improve the economy. That's not going to improve our lives. But we're being told right now, just like we were told, hiding in your home, being a prisoner in your home under COVID-19 was going to make America better. It didn't. It hasn't. It can't. Neither is this. But this is what is being shoved down our throats. And whether people agree with me or not, this is the view I have, and I'm willing to say it because I have a First Amendment right to do so, even though some people would say, well, you can't say that. And I disagree. And I understand a lot of people are not going to comment on this unless they want to attack me. They're not going to comment on this line because we're talking about racism. And some people are going to say, well, I'm white, I can't comment. Yes, you can. And anyone who tells you can't is inherently racist. The idea is you must be able to speak. And if you disagree, you need to have your voice heard so that we can all learn and we can all grow. But when one group is trying to denounce people and to silence them because of, well, I'm black, that's not a reason. That has nothing to do with it. That doesn't mean people can't talk. That's just so wrong. That is inherently wrong. And you know it's wrong. And Jason, you know what? Here's a definition of racism I think everyone can understand and is very, very accurate. It's not based on what political belief you have or political ideology. It's real simple. You take a situation, you take a statement, reverse the colors, interchange the colors. Instead of saying it's about white people or black people, or just reverse it. If you can't say this to an Asian, if you can't say this to a Hispanic, if you can't say this to whatever group without it being some kind of ism, a racism, a sexism, then that statement or that action is inherently wrong. Period. There's the definition. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with what is happening. It is very simple. Let's get back to that simplicity. It shouldn't be that difficult. Take the politics out of it. Do we want to have better police? Yes. That has nothing to do with race. That has everything to do with having better police for our communities. That's simple. We all agree on that. I don't see anyone questioning that. Let's deal with that. Don't add more to it. Because the answer is as simple as that. And people who are adding to that have an agenda. They're not looking for fixing the problem. They're looking to advance their political agenda. And it's not something that I just thought of, and it's not something that I'm suddenly making up. I believe, and in fact, according to Rasmussen, just a couple of days ago, May 27th, 69% of America agreed. Jason mentions it's like their definition of hate speech. Hate speech, I don't believe there is hate speech. There is speech that is hateful. There are people who have hateful intentions, but speech is speech. First Amendment. Don't stop people. You don't get to say there's fire in a crowded room unless there's a fire. You don't get to say insightful words like go burn down that building because that's insightful. You also shouldn't be able to say you're white, apologize for existing. That's insightful. That's not hateful, it's insightful. And there is the difference. Many people may disagree with me. That's okay. You don't have to agree with me. This is my way of looking at it. If you don't agree, that's fine. That doesn't make you evil. It doesn't make me evil. It doesn't make me less black or you anything. It just means you disagree. It's America. We can do that. Jason goes on to say, hate speech is only defined by the individual that is offended by the speech. Not using speech the way that the self-declared victim defines it is hate speech. Webster's definitions do not apply. How can you, when you say that someone is being offended, something is defined by whether or not someone is offended is insane. People are offended by things all day long. People are offended by the fact that I have a YouTube channel. People are offended by the fact that I exist. Whether they're white, black, or otherwise. The black man who's telling me I'm not black enough is offended by my existence. That doesn't make it hate speech. That means he's just offended. Deal with it. And there's a problem. Again, I don't like having this conversation. I don't think this is that this is not the way to advance the issues that improve America. Not that people can't say these things. I don't think that using the emotions and the problem that we know exists, the death of George Floyd, to use that for a political gain, to usurp that energy, that emotion, that intent to improve America by lessening bad police is not something that you would use to advance an agenda that says, hey, socialism is great. I'm sorry, it's not the same. And I know, yeah, there's a few things that it's criminal in Canada to not address someone by a pronoun that they prefer, which is just insane to me. There's a lot of problems with the way Canada looks at it, but that's also why Canada isn't America. And some people don't like that. I do. America is America for a very good reason. And thank God that we are. Look, folks, we need to focus on improving our nation. And we need to focus on improving our nation together. We are Americans first and foremost. And anything that takes away from us, all being Americans, trying to have a better community to live together in, is a problem. Not that we're trying to all live together, not that we're all trying to improve, but if someone is trying to say, you are evil inherently because you exist, they're the problem, not you. Not in that. That's not the problem. The problem is not you being different. It's that someone is saying it's inherently evil to be different. That is the problem. I know that I'm talking, here I am talking, and I forgot to put the screen back onto me. I know. Today's show has not been the best show I've ever had. I know. Because I'm dealing with a lot of emotional issues that I hope to never have to deal with. Talking about things that I think are really silly. When someone, I never want, and I hope that I will never again have to deal with the question, and I know I will, am I black enough? If you have to say that, then there's something wrong with you. If you have to say that any of the people who listen or watch the show or comment on the show, if you have to ask what is their color of skin to determine whether or not they can speak, there's a problem with what you're saying, not with what they have said. If you have to have an issue with someone based on the color of their skin, then that is a problem starting with the person who has that issue, not the other people. We advance our nation, we advance ourselves by dealing with each other as human beings, as Americans, first and foremost. And if we improve the lives of every American, then everyone does better. Let's focus on that. If we can improve our lives, we will improve everyone's lives, whether they're one color or another, one religion or another, one sex or another, one sexual preference or another. That's where our focus needs to be. And if we can do that, we will improve the nation, because that has worked in our nation. When we deal with people as people, we have improved, and that's why the 1970s, the environment that we had then is not the environment we have today. 70s were racially charged. There were problems. The 60s, the 50s. Today, those issues largely don't exist. We improved the nation. People like Plot are taking us backwards. They're trying to create problems that we already solved. Let's not do that. Again, this hasn't been my best show because I just don't like having to talk about this stuff. It's stupid. I think we do better by telling each other and dealing with each other as human beings. Call me ignorant if you want to. I just think that's better. And with that, I'm just going to end this show here. You're going to love it or you're going to hate it. There's not much more to it. You think I'm right or you think I'm wrong. There's not much more to it. And that's okay. But if I hope whether you like this program, this episode, which is different than most episodes, but if you like this episode, I hope you like it. And the only reason that you should like it or not like it is the quality of the content of the show, not the color of the host of the show. And if that's the reason for anything, love it, hate it, if it's the content of the show and not the color of my skin, I'm perfectly fine with it. But if someone wants to come on in the comments afterwards and say, well, you're not black enough, please do me a favor. Just don't watch the show. I don't care. If you don't think I'm black enough, don't watch the show. I don't care. I don't know how to say it better than that. And hopefully I never have to say it again. All right, folks. I hope everyone's going to be well. It'll be interesting to see what happens with these final protests that are happening, these actions by progressive leaders of tomorrow across the nation and in my community. Let's hope that they all stay safe. Let's hope that everyone gets to hear what they have to say and there is no violence. That's what I'm praying for, and I hope to see you guys. I will be back next week, 2:30, and let's hope that we have a more positive, constructive conversation about something that actually really does matter for America. I'll talk to y'all soon.